What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Steelers Breakdown podcast. Nick Farabaugh here, as always, and I got a special guest with me, my good friend Kevin Fielder. Kevin is what I would consider the small skull guru, if you will. He's into the underrated guys that maybe you don't hear about. Kevin, how are you doing, man?
What's going on, Nick? What's going on, Nick? How you doing? Excited to talk some small school prospects. This is like my favorite thing. So,
Yeah, this is your favorite thing because you're posting about random guys that I haven't heard of, and 6 months later they're drafted in the seventh round. I'm like, Kevin knew about him. And one of those guys was Dante Kent. Like literally, I don't think anyone in the Steelers draft room. I don't think any of the guys that I talked to that are really plugged in even knew Dante Kent. And the Steelers get him in the seventh round. So this was a little bit of a surprising selection. I've since watched some tape on him. Slot corner, can play outside, returner, does a little bit of different things. But what is your reaction to Dante Kent being drafted? And kind of what did you think of Dante Kent before he was drafted?
yeah, when I watched him, I think I had a similar sense to you in that he is a slot corner in the NFL, but played a lot of outside corner in like Central Michigan. They run one of the weirdest schemes I've ever seen with a lot of like cover two, which you don't see a lot of in college football. But he was a lot more outside corner in college, but has to move inside with his size. I mean, he's like 5'10", probably is going to get killed on the outside long term. I wasn't that surprised he got drafted though. I had a priority free agent grade on him, but that was really close to being a seventh round grade because I thought his athleticism carried over. I thought his special teams value carried over, and I thought he was really good in just zone coverages. Unsurprisingly, given that he played a lot of that in college. Now, my biggest issue with him is there are a ton of times where he just gets way too aggressive, and he tries to like steal plays that aren't going to be there, and that gets you killed in the NFL, even if it doesn't get you killed in the MAC. And so if he cleans that up, he's like a reliable defensive player. But I think long term, he can carve out a role as a special teamer, carve out a role as a punt returner, which I mean that gets you on the roster as a seventh round pick. That gets you an opportunity to develop those other skills. So I'm not shocked he was a pick in the seventh round, but I I think he probably should have been more of like a late seventh PFA guy. So it's not a shock that he went in the seventh round.
It's interesting to me, some of the stats. So over, I believe, the last 2 or 3 years, he leads the NCAA in tackles by corner. So this is a good tackling corner that can do the special team stuff. He also is second in that span in pass breakups, but second in explosive receptions allowed. It's like the perfect encapsulation of him. He's a Harrisburg kid, so he's not too far, PA kid. So the Steelers kind of know about him from that. Where do you kind of see him fitting into this room with the Steelers? They have Beanie Bishop, but not much else, to be quite honest with you, in that slot room. They did sign Sebastian Castro, who's interesting as a UDFA. Honestly, I was talking with Devin Jackson yesterday on this podcast, Kevin, and he said if you flipped Castro and Kent, maybe you would actually think that, like in terms of consensus board stuff, that's what you would think. But Kent kind of factors into the slot room a little interestingly. So you think his path to the roster is probably more of a slot gunner punt return type?
Yeah, I think he's got to have to earn his keep on special teams first. I don't think he's good enough on defense to just be a guaranteed defensive player day one. But like I do know that Calvin Austin is their punt returner a little bit more full time, but maybe they're trying to get him just a little bit more focused on offense. And so if that's the case, I think that's where Dante Kent can really sort of get his playing time, get his experience. If not, you mentioned punt gunner, right? Like I think he can be a solid punt gunner. I think that there are pathways for him to make the roster, which if you're picking a guy in the seventh round, that's what you ask for. You ask for a guy to have pathways to make the roster. And with his experience, with his tackling, like there is a pathway for him to be a viable special teams player, even if he's not the tallest. And the thing that helps him is he's incredibly fast. He was one of the best athletes in small school football, ran under a 4.40. Like there is certainly a pathway for him to contribute. I just think it's going to have to be on special teams first, especially when you look at some of those other corners in the room. And you mentioned a guy like Sebastian Castro, who is going to be competing with him. And so I think it's going to come down to whichever one of those two can be a little bit more of a viable special teamer and do a little bit more on special teams. But I see the pathway for Dante Kent to be that guy.
Yeah, interesting player. He was 5'10", 187 in his pro day, ran a 4.38, had a 38.5 inch vertical, 10-3 broad. I mean, pretty good numbers, honestly. So he's a really athletic player. As you mentioned, Castro's kind of the opposite of that, but both really good tacklers. So I'm interested to see how that actually kind of works out. But I had you on because we have some UDFAs to talk about now, don't we, Kevin? And
These are the guys I've watched that almost no one else has watched, I guarantee you.
right. The first one I want to talk about is the fullback back? I wonder, but the Steelers did sign a fullback to the largest to the largest guaranteed money UDFA deal of a non-quarterback in franchise history was DJ Thomas Jones. He got $30,000 in guaranteed money, and this guy played a little bit of tight end, played a little bit of H-back, played a little bit of fullback. Real Arthur Smith type of player here in DJ Thomas Jones. But when you watched him, what'd you think of him? He's a little athletic, actually, when you look at the testing numbers. What'd you think of him, and how's his projection as a fullback special teamer type projected to the NFL?
Yeah, so the first thing that caught my eye when I was watching him was this guy is better than most guys at the Sun Belt level. And I thought for sure that like his size should have been a power four player. And then I went back and looked. He played 6 games at Ole Miss before transferring over to South Alabama. So he is a power four guy who transferred down. And look, man, it paid off for him because South Alabama uses him in a ton of different ways. They love to like move him around the formation with a lot of really weird motions. Love to use him on like split zone blocks and insert blocks. Like he is all over the place for them on offense, and blocking is his thing. That guy, I think I've never seen a guy who loves to block more. Pass block, blocking at the line of scrimmage, everything that you ask for like a fullback tight end hybrid to do, he does. And his blocking is NFL ready. My only concern with him long term is he was really good at running the 40, but his 10-yard split was like awful. So that normally indicates to me, and without seeing his 40-yard tape live, either he takes a while to get going or he just had a really bad start. And I don't know which one of those it is, but it was almost certainly one of those. I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's a serviceable athlete, which for a fullback, for a guy who is there to block and be a physical monster at the line of scrimmage, that's good enough for me. It would not shock me if he makes the 53-man roster. With his ability to block, with his ability to be an extra man in the box and sort of be a serviceable blocker, uh, those guys tend to make rosters over other tight ends, and we will talk about one here. But like, I loved his blocking film. I thought that was some of the best blocking film I've watched this year from a tight end in a class that for small school guys didn't have a real lot of really good blocking tight ends. Uh, I graded him as a PFA guy, so it's not shocking that he was one of those priority guys who get a ton of not guaranteed money. But it wouldn't shock me if in a few months here we're talking about him making the 53-man roster.
Yeah, so I mean, he ran a 4.63, a 1.71 10 yard, as you mentioned. But even some of these other numbers, I mean, 35-inch vertical, 10 broad, 702 three cone, 421 shuttle. I mean, there's some things to work with there at 6'1", almost 6'2", 250. Where do you kind of see him positionally fitting in to an offense at the NFL level? Do you think he's a just a true fullback, or do you think he can be a guy that plays on the point? Do you think he's a guy that can kind of play as that wing type player? Because the Steelers last year, their fullback was essentially Connor Hayward, Michael Pruitt, and Darnell Washington rolled into one player. But could someone, even Ben Skowronek played there a little bit? They kind of use all these different guys, but could Thomas Jones play all those different roles, or do you see him kind of siloing himself into one of them?
I think he can play in line. I don't think it's his best fit and his best role, but I think that there is a pathway for him to do that. And the thing that stood out to me was he was not completely out of his depth against LSU this year. And he certainly struggled. He was not as good as he was against like North Texas in non-conference players, Sun Belt opponents, but he held his own for the most part. And I think that his physicality can carry over. Like his strike, his initial strike on run blocking at the line of scrimmage is incredible. And that indicates to me you're an inline tight end fullback. That indicates to me that you probably are not a move H-back kind of wing tight end, but you can be an inline fullback. And I always think back to how the Shanahan offenses, and I know Arthur Smith is not a Shanahan disciple, but how they use their fullbacks with, moving them around the formation, trying to get different looks. And I think Thomas Jones has a similar pathway to impacting a team, at the NFL level because he has experience playing H-back, he has experience playing in line, and I think those experiences can carry over.
Yeah, Steelers tried to sign Kyle Juszczyk this offseason, so it tells me they're looking for a fullback type. So maybe this guy has a serious chance to make the roster. Special teams will also be something he's going to have to do if he does that. But let's talk about that other tight end because this guy's interesting. I had no clue who he was. You actually hit me up right after the Steelers signed him, JJ Galbraith from South Dakota. Really fun player. Undersized. He's only 231 pounds as a tight end, but this guy can move. He's tough as nails. I'll tell you what, I watched his tape. He makes tough catches over the middle of the field, takes shots, played through a shoulder injury this year and still played well. Tell me about JJ Galbraith, because this guy to me, I mean, he was fun. We'll read the numbers after Kevin gives me a synopsis, but he's a really athletic move tight end from the looks of it.
Incredibly experienced player at the FCS level, which is certainly something that you look for when signing FCS guys. And on film, you mentioned the toughness, you mentioned the physicality. There was not a time where I thought he was going to die on the field a few times, and he got right back up. I was like, okay, you know what? The toughness is not a question mark, despite him being 230 pounds. Athleticism, movement. He was a track and field standout in high school, and that certainly carries over to his tape. And his ability to sort of move around the middle of the field and make those sort of intermediate passes look easy, that's something that is going to have to be his calling card in the preseason to make the roster. You mentioned the size. That's going to be the biggest question mark, I think, for a lot of people. And it's the biggest question mark for me is this a guy who you try and add 10 pounds to get him up to a little bit more of a respectable 240 pounds, which is still pretty undersized for a tight end, but is probably closer to what you can play at in the NFL? Because truthfully, I don't think you could play at 230 pounds in the NFL long term. But I think his athleticism, his route running, like those are things that carry over. And I don't think his athleticism drops off if he adds a little bit of extra weight. He ran a 4.67 40, had a 1.62 10-yard split, really good agility numbers. Like those are things that tend to carry over. And so I like him as a player. It's just finding the role. Is he a move tight end? Is he an H back? Do you add the weight and try and make him an inline guy? But I think he has to be more of a move tight end, which frankly, there may be no better offense for you to fall into than the Arthur Smith offense, who is not afraid to use tight ends in unique ways. And so it's going to be tough for him to make the 53-man roster with some of Pittsburgh's other tight ends, but I think he adds a different element that could be intriguing for Arthur Smith and could be intriguing for that offense. And so I see the pathway, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult than I think Thomas Jones, who can play the fullback role.
Yeah, he's interesting. You also add 38-inch vertical, 10-3 broad to those numbers you read. I mean, this guy's got some real athleticism to him. I wonder where they would put him in the offense. Probably on those in the power slot role in some ways. The Steelers don't necessarily have a power slot outside of Robert Woods, so they could use him there. And here's the other interesting thing that I think's working in his favor, Kevin. There's no true backup on the roster to Pat Fryermuth. I think that's the interesting. Washington and Donald Parham are different players. Connor Hayward's a different player. Galbraith fits into the Fryermuth role more. And while I don't necessarily think that puts him on the 53 man, what I think it does do is give him a perfect spot on the practice squad, which could be something to look at. Where do you kind of see him fitting in? The Arthur Smith offense is kind of interesting. Do you see him more as a true tight end, or do you see him more as this power slot type? We've been talking recently about how the lines have become blurred between these power slot receivers and these move tight ends. They're kind of becoming the same player nowadays. You see him kind of throwing into that type of role, or do you see him actually putting on, 10, 15 pounds and trying to become more of an inline guy?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the Fryermuth comparison, right? Like I think that is his pathway to being a guy for the Pittsburgh Steelers because that was something I was looking at. I was like, wow, this room has Pratt Fryermuth and then a lot of inline tight ends. And that certainly works out. But if Fryermuth goes down, uh, that offense completely changes, I think, because they don't have a guy who can do that stuff. And so I think that may be Galbraith's calling is just being the Fryermuth, maybe being the power slot guy, but never really being the inline guy. Because I mean, the question mark is 10 pounds enough, or do you have to add 15 or 20? And that's sort of the situation that comes about because 10 pounds could be enough. But if you add 10 pounds and it's clear it's not enough, suddenly you're either looking at losing 10 pounds and going back to the weight that you were playing at in college or gaining an extra 10 pounds and trying to get up to like 250. And I just think that's a really difficult place to be an undrafted guy. And so I think it's a power slot, which fits him. I think that he is a good enough blocker for a power slot, probably not a good enough blocker for an inline tight end right now. But I like his ability in the receiving game enough, especially on end breaking routes, to be a guy in an Arthur Smith offense. It may just take a year on the practice squad for him to be able to do it, which is certainly a pathway for a guy like him is being on the practice squad. Maybe you get elevated a few times if Freiburg is dealing with a stinger and can't play. But I think right now the pathway is him having to be a practice squad guy who gets a year of development. And we're talking more about 2026 being the year for him to potentially make the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Also, again, every time I mention these UFA guys, teams are going to come into play. Danny Smith is going to be a big part of that. The last guy I wanted to talk about, Kevin, was some guy that wasn't even on my radar. But when you look at the athletic testing, he stands out. Aiden Williams, Steelers signed this D2 offensive lineman from Minnesota Duluth. I mean, it was hard finding tape on him, to be quite honest with you guys. But man, if you wanted to go to an outside mid zone team, this is the type of player it looks like you would want. Would you kind of think of him in the limited tape you were able to get of him and kind of how he can fit into this roster?
Yeah, you want to make it even more funny. He's actually from Alaska, so there's not even a lot of high school tape that you can find on this guy. And he actually had a really unique path to getting to Minnesota Duluth, where he had to kind of do a lot of the recruiting himself. Had to go to camps and put your name in front of people, because coaches are not flying to Alaska to go watch high school guys. But he started his career as a tight end, gained about 50 pounds in an off season to move to offensive line, and he's an athlete. Like that's what he is right now. He's an athlete, and the strength is a little bit of a question mark. I think play strength wise, and it was an issue at the East West Shrine Bowl, which is what he participated in, where he certainly held his own against Power Four competition and draftable guys, but he was not a standout, which is certainly an issue for a small school guy. Is you'd rather be the standout than just another guy in the room, but I do like his athleticism. I like his explosiveness. I like his ability to get off the line. And I think in the NFL, he's probably more of an offensive guard center than he is a tackle, which is what he played at Minnesota Duluth. But a D2 guy who had a ton of success at the D2 level. The tape shows an athlete. The tape shows a guy who can move and get to that second level. But the play strength may be an issue early on. And so it's such a weird player because we're talking about a guy who, first of all, there's not a lot of tape. I was effectively watching like TV broadcasts from like the worst camera angles filmed by the poor intern student who has probably never filmed a football game. But like from a play perspective, I loved his athleticism. I loved his get off. Like those are things that translate. You may have to teach him how to use his hands a little bit more. I think he needs to learn NFL technique as opposed to college technique. But everyone I've spoken to at Shrine Bowl, his high school coaches have indicated to me that this guy will only continue to get better and his best football is ahead of him. And so, as a UDFA guy, not a shock he was a UDFA guy. Thought he maybe could have snuck into the seventh round for a team looking for an offensive lineman, but this is a guy who can certainly continue to improve and get better. Just the biggest question mark is how long does it take for the D2 guy moving to the NFL?
Yeah, you mentioned he played tackle in college. I mean, 38, 32-inch arms. That's probably not going to stick a tackle. He'll probably be a guard. He did flip inside a little bit in his college days. 6'5", 315, 5'1", 740, but 175 10 yard. I mean, that's pretty good at 315. And so, I mean, 30-inch vertical. Hit 27 reps on the bench. So there's some good numbers there for Williams. He's got an interesting path to the roster. The Steelers don't have a ton of depth on their offensive line. So I wouldn't rule it out for him being the ninth offensive lineman on this roster, but he's someone to watch. So Kevin, if there's someone to watch from the Steelers' UDFA pool to make the roster, who are you pointing to?
Real quick, I want to point out that Aiden Williams' two best RAS relative athletic score comps is Talise Fuanga and Oli Fashanu. So
Oh
he is
wow.
certainly in good company to be an NFL offensive lineman. To answer that question, of the small school guys, Dante Kent, I think, is the closest to making the roster just because he was a draft pick. But I do think DJ Thomas Jones makes the 53-man roster. I think that his ability to block, his ability to be a physical player at the point of attack, his initial strike on run blocking is incredible. He loves to block too, which is something you can't always find in tight ends. And so I think there's a pathway for him to make the 53-man roster and be a contributor on offense, especially if Atlanta wants to go to, or not Atlanta, Pittsburgh, excuse me, wants to go to a little bit more true fullback sets, which if they were trying to sign Juszczyk, if they were trying to, if they're giving DJ Thomas Jones a ton of guarantees, that seems to be the indication. And I think that he can do a little bit of that stuff, still be a solid inline tight end, and would not shock me if he's the tight end four on this roster. Maybe like the tight end five, if you want to keep four tight ends and a fullback. And so I think there are more pathways for him to make the roster than anyone else. I will point out Rock Taylor from Memphis, another guy who can make this roster. With his sort of route running and his athleticism, I think he's a special teamer first. But if I had to pick one, it's DJ Thomas Jones of the smaller school guys, just because of his blocking, and he's a good enough athlete, even if he's not an elite athlete.
Yeah, someone to keep an eye on, DJ Thomas Jones. I'm interested to see how he it kind of evolves over the offseason. I'm going to be really interested to see them drafting Caleb Johnson too, by the way. A lot of eye sets, a lot of things with the fullback in the Iowa offense. So maybe,
We're so back. I love that Pittsburgh is just like we're going to use fullbacks. You
yeah.
can't stop me.
I love that they have this smash mouth mentality to them. Let's see if they can execute it this year. They didn't do a great job last year, but I'm hoping that they can do it this year. Kevin, thanks for coming on, man. Make sure to tell people where they can follow you, read your stuff, and support your work.
Yeah, I'm over on Twitter at Rivals Fielder, and I'm over on Blue Sky at Kevin Fielder, and then it's the .bsky social thing. But I think you can find me on Blue Sky with just at Kevin Fielder. So at Kevin Fielder on Blue Sky, and then at Rivals Fielder on Twitter.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell for more rookie minicamp coming up this week. Stay tuned for that.